Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Budget 2026 comes at a time where Malaysia's economic recovery appears to be steady, however slightly uneven. Inflation has eased, but for many households, the pressure of daily living costs remain. So as we head into the next budget, I think it's time to take stock. Have last year's social protection measures been enough to shield vulnerable Malaysians from economic uncertainty? Or is it time to rethink how we target and design support and social protections? Joining us on the show today to help us think this through is Dr Amjad Rabi, who is a social security economist attached with Universiti Malaya's Social Wellbeing Research Centre. Amjad, good to have you back on the show. I know it's been almost a year since Budget 2025. I'm wondering if we could look at the overall state of economic well-being for lower income Malaysians. In terms of your assessment, has Malaysia's national economic performance actually translated into some real improvements for our security and the resilience of Malaysian households?
Thank you very much, Melissa, for having me. It's hard to believe that's been 1 year since the last budget, but it's also, I'm glad that we are allowing for reflection on past year. I would say maybe the most significant, most significant measure is the increase of minimum wage. That affects many people in Malaysia. At least 30% of the workers, they earn around the minimum wage. So that can be allowing people to receive higher income, and that helps them for the cost of living. And especially if we know that minimum wage was the last time was increased, it was a couple of years ago in 2022 to 1,500. So as percentage of median income, it was 62% when it was in 2022. But when you leave it without indexation, it decreased. So it's good to see the government delivered on that one. And what we also have seen is the expansion on SDR, the social assistance program. It's in terms of coverage as well as the amount of money, and also some ad hoc measures that we're taking, including the 100 ringgit for all citizens. So maybe we can unpack. You know, SDR, it goes back longer time, so it's hard to to see the impact isolated for this year. The 100 ringgit, it's important to understand 100 ringgit out of it can provide food for households for a whole week, grocery for those in the lower income. So it must have an impact. But for us in academia, usually when we say impact, we love to see an evaluation done to assess quantitatively what does that mean for multiple objectives. So I would say we don't have enough information to really assess the impact of it. But one measure we wanted to go back to the wages. I think that one we can assess the impact of the minimum wage increase is in Malaysia starting actually 2013-14. All the way to the COVID-19, GDP per capita, if you take GDP divided by the population, was growing at the same level with wages. So wages were growing. That means that return to capital and return to wage was going nicely together. But what we've seen during COVID, it's this decouple. We started seeing wages both fall, but return to capital was very resilient. So you started seeing GDP per capita increasing. So we hear economy is doing well, but at the same time, wages did not increase. Wages has been very kind of sticky, did not go with wages. So you started seeing this gap. And hopefully the minimum wage would have helped to, and we've started seeing some evidence that helped to bring growth of wages to be matching the growth of GDP per capita. And why is that important? Because low-income households, they spend a lot of their money on grocery, on necessities. Inflation has been stable in Malaysia, but food inflation, food and transport inflation, that increased at higher rate than the growth of wages. That means that people, they have less to spend on wages, so less to spend on food basics. So they need to make decisions to transition from one food item to another. And what we've seen is transitioning from healthy choices into instant noodles and other things. So the increase of minimum wage, I think this is very significant. The expansion of STR, I think that would help. Even we have some suggestion regarding STR.
This is very interesting in terms of measuring success, and I think it's very important that we do a bit of reflection and evaluation. You talked about wages being one measure of seeing whether there has been progress, but what are some of your other measures that we should be thinking about, particularly when we think about success in social protections? What is it that we should be looking at and measuring? Do we look at poverty reduction? Is it social mobility? What are the indicators that you look at as an academic, Amjad?
And that's very important, because in many countries, it's unfortunately still the thinking about social protection is a charity kind of things, you know. So you need to look for the most miserable looking person and give them money. You feel good. Nothing wrong about it, you know, Melissa. All of us, we are we concerned about the well-being of our fellow Malaysians. So it's very important. But the government has multiple objectives. It's developmental approach to social protection. What I mean by this, it's sometimes, you know, when you give directly with the narrow target of reducing poverty, what you do is you create the incentive for people to be poor to deserve it. It's the same example I always say. If I tell my daughter, if you fail an exam, I will give you an award. That is the wrong thing to do. We need to make sure that we give like the assistance in a way that is de-linked from the income. One example, since we talk about STR, if you look at STR, the criteria, if you are a household with no children, so husband and wife, your income is 2,500. Under STR, you will be entitled for 1,000 ringgit. Now, if you are a household with 4 children, husband, wife, and 4 children, with income not 2,500, let's say 2,550, it's just 50 ringgit. With 4 children, not the other, so you will get the same 1,000 ringgit. So, and here where it's very important, because it's also like the question why a husband and wife without children, why they have low wage. It's likely the wife is not working. So if you give money based on this threshold, that if you are 2,500 and below your income, you will be entitled for 1,000. If the wife gets a job to work for minimum wage 1,700, she will not make the decision that I will take the job for 1,700. She would say, if I take the 1,700, our income will increase to 4,200. So what it means, I will lose 1,000 ringgit, which I get from STR. So the decision becomes the decision becomes based on not 1,700 but 700, and many people would say I will not work because I will lose the benefit. So that's the logic we wanted to see, hopefully gradually moving away from this dependency and link to income and de-link it with income. Maybe you can link it to wealth. Wealth is not easily mobile. You exclude the very rich. But it's again income. We don't want to send the signal that if you work hard, then you might lose the benefits.
Right. How do we do that? So if you think about government's position in ensuring there's efficiency in targeting, making sure that the support reaches those who actually need it, how do you think the government should think about identifying and delivering aid to vulnerable Malaysians better? How does that process become more efficient, more precise?
And this is very relevant question, Melissa, because Malaysia now is upper middle income country transitioning into high income countries. And countries, when they move into this threshold, they move away from the charity-like models into more developmental. How it can be done? Now, if you look, for instance, at STR, there are many programs. There are tens of programs in Malaysia run by so many organizations. But let's look at the biggest one, STR. STR here is the coverage now, it reached 63%. If you look at individual level, household multiplied by the average size, it's about 63% of Malaysians. receiving STR. And the government is okay with also like covering the middle 40, so bottom 40 and middle 40. Now, there are two ways. One way is to go to 100% of the public, ask them about their well-being, to identify the 63% or 80% of the public that deserve the benefit. An alternative method, it's much cheaper, and you don't know, by the way, the income of the low wage, because they are in the informal sector, they don't pay income tax. It's very difficult, and and we have evidence for that. They try their different ways to manipulate the system. An alternative and better way, especially relevant to higher income country, is instead of targeting everyone who is poor, you don't have data, you remove the rich. The rich usually have a fingerprints in the data. You don't need to ask for it. You know those who owns 2 properties or more, those who own specific cars, those from the taxes. So from their, they are clear in the data, the government, the administrative data they have. So the rule, what we are proposing is move away from the household, as I mentioned, the example I gave you. Prioritize, for instance, senior citizens. They are disadvantaged in Malaysia. 42% is the relative poverty among them. Children, because again, it's developmental. You need a child to receive nutrition. Maternity, it's very critical period. In the development of the child, but also the well-being of the mother. Also, you can think of disability. You prioritize this group, and then you say we will give the cash assistance to these groups, and then you remove the ones they have wealthy threshold. If anyone is above, owning 2 houses and more, not 1 house. 1 house is, but at least 2 houses and above, and certain number of cars. No question asked. We have the data. And it's good the government using MyCap, which makes life easy. So without question asked, transfer will be made. You reach the same level, but in developmental way. Instead of asking you to prove you poor to deserve it, now we saying you deserve it, but we will exclude the ones they are well off with no question asked because we have the data. Administratively easier.
I like that. So removing the rich from the equation, look at whoever else is left. So given that we are just a few days away from budget 2025, 2026, what would you then like to see in terms of social welfare allocations in this year's budget?
What I would love to say, and I advocated many, many times, I mean, we really need to look at the most vulnerable group in Malaysia currently is actually senior citizens. Now, the assumption in Malaysia every time that if you give people money, they will become lazy. But senior citizens, they already passed the age of working. So there is the dependency is not fair, So, but why I'm worried about this group is that, as I mentioned, relative poverty among them is 42% in comparison to 16% national average of relative poverty, DOSOM data. So this is, 1 out of 2 almost. And then why it's important? Because we did the study. So how they have many people don't have EPF altogether. Many people. Out of the 24 million in the working age, only 8.5 million in EPF active members. So many they don't. And especially women, they live longer. And when we ask, okay, you don't have EPF, you don't have anything, how we did the study, then on average, they receive, senior citizen above the age 65 receive 532 ringgit each senior citizen from their children, adult children. So if I imagine 500 is almost 1/5 of the median income. Imagine the pressure on your age, middle-aged people, that they take care not only, not only take care of children, which is supposed to, like now it's very expensive in tuition, nutrition, everything is expensive, and let alone to buy an apartment. At the same time, they are obliged to provide for their parents, and they are what we produced a paper at SWRC, Social Wellbeing Research Center. We call them the sandwich generation. It's really they pressure both ways. One to take care of their children and themselves also at the same time taking care of their parents. So if you prioritize the old age group in the targeting mechanism, that will reduce the pressure on everyone, not only dignified old age in Malaysia, but also their adult children, that they feel pressured.
Right. Amjad, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. Dr Amjad Rabi there from Universiti Malaya's Social Wellbeing Research Centre. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. As Malaysia prepares to table Budget 2026, it's worth asking, how far have we come in protecting the most vulnerable? Now, over the past year, the government has rolled out several new initiatives and extended existing ones aimed at easing the cost of living and reducing economic vulnerability. So joining me on the show to discuss whether or not it has worked, it has been effective, and how to make it more effective is Calvin Cheng, Director of the Economics Program at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, better known as ISIS Malaysia. He works on issues in applied economics, including jobs, social protections, and economic development. Calvin, welcome back to Consider This. It's good to have you on the show with me. It's been nearly a year since Budget 2025, and I'm wondering how you would assess the effectiveness of current social safety nets in addressing vulnerabilities. How would you describe the current landscape of social protections in Malaysia? Were there outcomes from Budget 2025 that you would classify as some clear wins?
Well, I think if we look back at Budget 2025, there were certainly wins. We saw higher allocations for social assistance, for instance. I think, if I'm not mistaken, about a 5 billion increase, and that includes 4 programs, including the Sumbangan Tunai Ramah and SARA programs, as well as some of the JKM transfers for children and the elderly. And besides that, there were attempts to also widen coverage for some contributory social security schemes for informal, non-standard workers, and also individuals engaged in home production or unpaid domestic work, so to speak. So I think that these are achieved mainly through matching incentives and subsidies to encourage voluntary contributions, including the I3 program, etc. And outside the budget over the past year, we've also seen some movement on other fronts, including the Gig Workers Bill, which was just passed, which does extend basic labor protections and social security protections to some millions of gig workers. But as with anything, there are still some more steps that we can take. For instance, on social assistance, we know that from last year's budget, the budget 2025, the cash transfer programs, including Sumbangan Tunai Ramah program, we didn't see a large increase or any increase in actual benefit size, for instance, whereas most of that increase in benefits came from food voucher programs, including SARA, right? And we also know that the other sort of long-term legacy issues of these cash transfer programs inherited from past iterations of the Sumbangan Tunai Ramah, including the BSH and BRIM before that, which includes issues regarding targeting exclusion errors and issues regarding program fragmentation, and also the existence of benefit cliffs in which there's a threshold in which if you pass that income, you immediately see immediate loss in benefits. So those are some issues in social assistance, and they're more on overall social protection structure, if I may. So one of which is obviously there's large progress being made, but hasn't seemed to be a shift from the existing system, which is centered around that concept of formal stable employment and centered around the idea also of giving back instead of a larger social protection framework. Right. And yeah.
I'm curious to know, so when you talked about exclusion errors and benefit cliffs, when we think about the current discourse around social protection targeting, what is it? I mean, there's been a lot of debate around unconditional cash transfers, kind of the blanket approach. Then there's targeted vouchers, there's the option of providing services. I'm wondering, from your perspective, Calvin, which policy design best protects against economic shocks, particularly for B40 households in the Malaysian context?
Well, I think there are two things to mention here. One of which is that, firstly, social protection is not just for the B40 in the Malaysian context. It's for everyone, right, to different degrees. And it's really more of a fundamental societal level policy instead of a type of feed the poor type of framing, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing I will say is that there is no single best targeting design for any program, because really the best design is the one that is fit for a purpose of that specific program, right? And we know we need a mix of programs for Malaysia's social protection system, right? So I think we can think of it as different layers or components of social protection that need different types of targeting and different types of policy design, because they serve different objectives and they work sort of alongside each other and in synergy. So for example, you can think of the first layer, maybe something like unconditional cash transfer, which is unconditional in the sense that as long as you meet that income threshold and you apply for it, you get it, right? So this is something like the current STR program. And you can think of it as layers. The second layer would be something more categorical for life cycle vulnerabilities. So this is the idea that certain groups like children, for instance, or the elderly, we may want to take a near universal categorical approach. So this means that we want to extend coverage as much as possible. So this means targeting on age categories instead of income, for instance. So this would be something akin to like the existing Bantuan Warga Emas or Bantuan Kanak-Kanak programs, but they would be non-needs tested and tending towards greater coverage or an exclusion. And then above and above, we can think of multiple layers that build on each other, including universal services. So I guess all this to say, it's all part of the toolkit.
Okay, so use the different types of tools to address social protections. We often think of it as the responsibility of government, and largely the onus is on the government to design good interventions, good social protection policies. But do you think, Calvin, there is a role for the public sector to play? And I'm wondering, can public sector complement government in terms of providing social safety nets for economically vulnerable Malaysians?
Right. So I think, as you mentioned, most of the policy design aspects, I think those are more related to government policy. But there are some things, I think, very basic things that private sector entities could look at. I think it's very basic. And the first thing is just comply with and support existing social protection reforms. This means comply with all the statutory requirements, either for co-contributions or ensuring compliance in many ways. And this is quite basic, but it's often sometimes contravened, right? And also, I think this also relates to sort of having the private sector have more constructive engagement instead of resistance, right? So I think with a lot of new social protection policies on the horizon, including the gig workers bill, I think it's important that the private sector does not sort of seek to undermine some of these well-intentioned reforms. I think too often, sometimes we see certain lobbying efforts via proxy groups and such have sought to delay or dilute the sort of labor and security legislation. And the second step, I think there are a lot of voluntary programs that exist. Obviously, there are statutory flaws regarding standards, regarding some programs, but there are some programs which are voluntary. And this may mean, first, for instance, including going beyond the minimum wage, for instance, to commit to higher standards, taking the high road in paying living wages, providing decent working conditions beyond statutory requirements. This may also mean, where possible, participating in voluntary programs like the progressive wage policy, for instance. So I think the biggest role the private sector can play is having sort of these shared values towards social and economic progress over just profit.
All right. Okay, so we are days away from Budget 2026. I'm curious to know what you would like to see in Budget 2026. Also, what changes, what improvements would you like to see in terms of social welfare allocations?
Well, specifically on social protection, I would say over the past decade, we need to give credit that Malaysia's made more progress in social protection, and Budget 2025, for instance, as I mentioned, has built on this. I think going forward, Budget 2026 can outline sort of a stronger vision and roadmap for social protection across agencies, across ministries, and across life cycle as well. So I think this can mean a few things, and one of which is institutionalizing programs so that they continue consistently rather than as temporary budget initiatives. Some programs are on an annual basis, a renewal basis. So each year we tune in to see what's in for this year, what's in for this year. But I think some of it would be better if it was more institutionalized across the longer term. And across that would be, I think, working towards some of these issues that I mentioned prior regarding coverage and adequacy, right? Mm-hmm. So increasing coverage is one important priority, I believe, making it easier for beneficiaries to apply for and receive assistance or to receive support. That also means gradual increases to benefit levels, perhaps by benchmarking benefit size to something like a percentage of income or adjusting regularly for inflation. Something is called index linking, for instance. And overall, and above that, I think it's just tackling a lot of these legacy issues in social assistance programs, including fragmentation of programs and databases and targeting errors. I think these are all very important aspects. And to say nothing of the various issues regarding fiscal constraints and such. So.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it, trying to get all this balanced? Correct, yeah. Calvin, thank you so much for being on the show with me today and sharing some of your insights with us. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was Calvin Cheng from ISIS Malaysia, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.